Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu.
Still no deal on ICE with 5 days to another partial government shutdown. Welcome to the Monday edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio as Democrats and Republicans fail to make progress on ICE restrictions up against a Friday night deadline. We're going to get you up to date on all of the stories we're covering with Bloomberg Washington correspondent Tyler Kendall, and we'll have insights from our political panel with Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino. Iran calling U.S. nuclear talks a step forward, but with a deal still elusive. We will compare notes with Natasha Hall at Chatham House to see where we are as this new week begins. It's the Monday edition on Bloomberg TV and radio, day after the Super Bowl. And as we listen to Charlie's commentary on the markets, we're, of course, all too aware of the Super Bowl indicator. If you're listening on 92.9 right now in Boston, we see you and offer condolences. But, of course, the old Super Bowl indicator that you don't hear so much about anymore, it goes back to 1978, New York Times, suggests a Super Bowl victory by the National Football Conference team means a bull market for stocks in the year ahead. Pretty good track record on this until recent history, I realize, but let's just keep that in mind as we count the days to another possible government shutdown. And when I say that, I mean one department, the Department of Homeland Security, will run out of money at the end of the night on Friday. And you probably feel like you've seen this movie before because it just happened a week ago. They, at that point, decided to do a 2-week continuing resolution so they could hammer out details on new restrictions for ICE. This was following the 2 fatal shootings, the 2 ICE shootings in Minneapolis. Democrats have asked for any number of things, from body cameras, which they're getting, to demasking, which has been very controversial, to much stricter use of judicial warrants, which Republicans have balked at, suggesting that no deal may emerge in the next 5 days. Bloomberg Washington correspondent Tyler Kendall is with us for the latest on this as we count things down. Tyler, lawmakers start coming back into town tonight. We don't have a way forward here.
It looks increasingly unlikely that there's going to be a broader-based deal to fund the Department of Homeland Security through the rest of the fiscal year. Though, of course, we should say anything could happen. Congress does love a deadline. They particularly like a deadline when it's up against a holiday recess and they're going to be out of town for at least part of next week. So maybe that could spur some action. But it really feels like the question now isn't, are they going to reach a broader deal when it comes to potential curbs on immigration and customs enforcement, but are they going to reach a deal for another continuing resolution, kick the can down the road to fund DHS, maybe another 2 weeks, maybe a month. I was on Capitol Hill last week and nobody could give me an answer on whether or not they're considering what would be considered essentially a patch so that they can keep negotiations going, because at this point it feels like the sides are just so far apart. It's hard to glean any details on whether or not they're talking to each other or just past each other at this point.
Well, we talked to any number of lawmakers on the program last week, including a number of Republican senators, Cornyn, Cruz, Budd. They were all just NO on demasking. That was a deal breaker. And based on what we've heard from Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, that's a deal breaker for them without. So we either shut down on Friday night or there's going to be a CR of some sort. John Thune has suggested he'd be open to a full year, bringing us back to the Cromnibus in 2014. Is that possible?
I mean, it could be, considering that the most prominent Republican in the Senate is saying that maybe that could be an option on the table. But at this point, Joe, when we're looking at the 10 demands that Democrats have laid out for Republicans, a lot of them, as you're alluding to, are non-starters for the party. And really, when we talked about the last government shutdown, we spoke a lot about what the pressure points were going to be. And at this point, Democrats are really holding firm that they think they have a winning agenda when it comes to potential curbs on ICE. But Republicans will tell you that this potential shutdown of just DHS, of course, we're only talking about this one department, isn't going to have any intended impacts when it comes to ICE, which did receive a huge amount of money under the One Big Beautiful Bill to the tune of $75 billion that they can use over the next 4 years. So instead, we're going to be talking about impacts to other agencies like FEMA, like TSA, though there has been a lot of concern about TSA, and we know that can impact lines at the airports. It was pointed out that It's really the FAA that controls the air traffic controllers, and they were already funded because the Department of Transportation got their full fiscal year funding.
Important distinction, Tyler. It's also important to note that lawmakers today in Washington are getting their first look at the unredacted Epstein files. They have to go to the Department of Justice. Apparently, a room has been set up. No electronic devices are allowed. And so we may be hearing from Ro Khanna, Tom Epstein, and others who were pushing for these files to be released. They're, I guess, going to have a briefing when they emerge later. But this is bringing some major ripple effects overseas as Keir Starmer fights for his political life. We just came up on the terminal with news that Starmer's cabinet members are voicing their support for the Prime Minister. But listen to Nigel Farage, the Reform UK leader, Member of Parliament.
The Scottish leader, Anna Sarwar, has called on him to go. The cabinet are coming out one by one being loyal because none of them want to appear to be the person that wields the knife. And he has to meet the backbench Labour Party at 6 p.m. this evening, where I expect the conversation will be of a rather franker nature. He won't be there for long. He'll be gone and replaced by somebody undoubtedly far worse.
Okay, so we should note here that Starmer's name does not appear in the Epstein files, even as many members of this administration find their names with no wrongdoing alleged. Starmer is guilty of hiring people in the files?
Yeah, so I think you framed it really well by saying this has had ripple effects in the last few days as more files came to light. So this is over the hiring of the former UK ambassador to the U.S., Peter Mendelsohn. We saw 2 top aides to Starmer resign over the weekend, one of them taking full responsibility for recommending Mendelsohn to that top post. Now, of course, his name was in the files, and once that had come out late last year, Starmer did dismiss him as the ambassador in September. But now it's really started to take this renewed life of its own in recent days amid this flurry of resignations, as some are now calling for Starmer to step down because he was the one that actually made that appointment. Now, Starmer, we have a new headline on the terminal. Every member of the cabinet has lined up against him, sort of buying him a little bit more time so that he can explain the decision a little bit more fully. He has vowed to release additional information, but it's been just a really stark morning for the UK Prime Minister as these calls really ramped up. And to your point, sort of a split screen, as here in Washington, lawmakers are trying to glean additional details while President Trump has told the U.S. that they should just move on from the Epstein files.
2 different sides of the ocean on this one, Tyler. Thank you. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall with us in our Washington bureau. As we try to keep tabs on what's happening as well with Iran, the president hasn't said anything about this today, coming off a weekend that some had thought might include military strikes. And of course, that's following a meeting on Friday in Oman as nuclear talks continue between our 2 nations. President Trump speaking here a bit earlier this month. This is the 6th of February at the on Air Force One. Let's listen.
Iran looks like it wants to make a deal very badly. We have to see what that deal is. But I think Iran looks like they want to make a deal very badly, as they should. Last time they decided maybe not to do it, but I think they probably feel differently. We'll see what the deal is. It'll be different than last time. And we have a big armada. We have a big fleet heading in that direction. We'll be there pretty soon.
That big fleet, of course, has been there for some time, including the carrier strike group led by the USS Lincoln. Natasha Hall is with us to talk this out and get a sense of maybe what we should be looking for. Associate Fellow at Chatham House. Natasha, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. Are you surprised there was no military action over the weekend?
Thanks for having me, Joe. I mean, I wasn't necessarily surprised, but I don't think it's off the table either. We know that President Trump is meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, on Wednesday, possibly, I would think, to mainly discuss Iran and potential strikes on Iran in the days leading up. So I don't think we're out of the dark yet at all. Of course, 8 months ago, when we were in the midst of U.S.-Iranian negotiations, we did see those surprise attacks on Iran's nuclear program in the midst of those negotiations. But again, it doesn't have to look the same this time around.
Of course. And I guess we should focus then on the talks that are taking place in the meantime. We had a change of venue last week and an ask by Iran that we isolate talks to the nuclear program. Is that something that would help to hasten a deal, or does that make you concerned because the U.S. wants to talk about the ballistic missile program and any other number of issues?
Well, it just seems like we're in Groundhog Day, unfortunately, except this isn't a rom-com. This is a really serious endeavor that involves nuclear weapons and potential regional war. We have been talking about Iran limiting or eliminating enrichment, and that has been the issue that has precluded negotiations from going further for the past several years now. And Iran seems to be intransigent on this point. And then at the same time, Israel in particular seems to have moved the goalpost, adding Iran's ballistic missile program to the negotiations framework. We saw that Trump said that he would be happy with an agreement that was limited to Iran's nuclear program. But I do suppose that the meeting, again, this Wednesday with Netanyahu will make Trump potentially change his mind and move the goalpost himself.
I'm glad that you just pointed us to that. What's going to happen at that meeting, and what is Benjamin Netanyahu asking for?
Well, Netanyahu is asking for a lot. Again, I said Iran is going to be a major player in these talks. Of course, Gaza is also going to be part of the negotiations and the discussions. But it does seem that Israel wants to see real constraints and limits on Iran's ballistic program. In the meantime, those in the region had always been worried about this program in Iran, even more so than the nuclear program, but had been told by previous administrations that they needed to essentially look to diplomatic negotiations with Iran over military warfare to deal with this issue. And of course, the Trump administration has been quite different. And so they've had to change tone and really negotiate with the United States and Israel on these points. But I do suspect that Iran will say that their ballistic weapons program is off the table completely, entirely, as it had been with the JCPOA earlier, as well as Iran's proxy network throughout the region, and who knows what else. I mean, at this point, we've also seen thousands of protesters killed in Iran, and that is apparently on the table as well. So it just seems like the negotiations framework is broadening at an alarming level at a time when we really need to see some movement on enrichment in particular.
Well, when you refer to an alarming level, that doesn't sound great. We know that Benjamin Netanyahu is in one of the president's ears, but he's got any number of other allies in the region in his other ear. When you consider Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, what are they saying?
Well, we know that Iran actually just recently threatened to hit the King Fahd industrial port. Now, as your audience members might know, this serves for around 20% of Saudi's trade and transit. So this would significantly affect oil markets, global trade. And they've made similar threats to other entities sort of throughout the region. And so I think, the pulse in the region is very high right now. They're extremely nervous. And this is why, of course, for many reasons, the U.S. has brought in this armada into the region to protect all of these facilities throughout, both in terms of, economic issues and also military issues as well. But I think that they are in high alert mode. They would probably like for this to dial down a bit. And they're probably worried that Israel is continuing to move forward, sort of regardless if there are any concessions made during this negotiations process with Iran.
Interesting. I have to ask you about Gaza. I'm assuming this is on the agenda when Benjamin Netanyahu arrives, which then invokes this idea of the Board of Peace and exactly where we are on the next stage or next phase of this ceasefire agreement. Natasha, will there be news this week?
That sort of remains to be seen. We've seen a lot of rhetoric in terms of the Board of Peace, in terms of the launching of so-called Phase 2 of the 20-point peace plan, but we haven't really seen reality change for Palestinians on the ground. We've seen all of the hostages, both alive and dead, returned, but we haven't seen the withdrawal of Israeli forces in any substantial way. We haven't seen the scale up of humanitarian aid that was promised. So the situation remains extremely dire for most Palestinians on the ground. And at the same time, we've seen a lot of U.S. allies refusing to join the Board of Peace, which is essentially this entity that Trump created in which he is the chairman for life and has full power over. So it's not moving in a positive direction, despite a lot of the rhetoric, despite a lot of the glossy presentations that we saw in Davos from Jared Kushner, looking at this sort of AI-inspired Dubai-style, sort of territory within Gaza. And the reality on the ground is just so separated from that it's hard to be optimistic about this moving forward, unless there are really serious discussions between Trump and Netanyahu on Wednesday. But I suspect that Iran will be the predominant player in those discussions.
Really interesting. Natasha, it's great to have you back. Thank you so much for setting our direction on what could be a really important week on both of these stories. Natasha Hall at Chatham House, that meeting again Wednesday, and we'll have full coverage here, as you would expect, on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Also, full coverage this week of what could be another partial government shutdown. We're going to turn to that next. The Department of Homeland Security is set to go without money at the end of the day on Friday, midnight, unless, of course, lawmakers can craft a deal or find some sort of agreement on restrictions surrounding ICE, if not the actual leadership at the Department of Homeland Security. We're going to get into this with our political panel next. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino with us on the Monday edition of Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg TV and radio. As we count down to two major events this week, you know about the one on Friday, the potential partial government shutdown, the shutdown of Homeland Security. That's when DHS runs out of money again. Just like it was going to a week ago, there was a 2-week continuing resolution to buy time to negotiate new restrictions around ICE. Those requests that Democrats have made have landed with a thud, and it looks like there may be no agreement before Friday. So we either get another continuing resolution or DHS shuts down. The one that you might not know about is that we are only 1 day away, counting down 1 day to the return of Bloomberg's Kayleigh Lines at this desk. Yes, 6 months later. And we have missed her greatly. I can't wait to sit here tomorrow with Kayleigh and tell the story from Washington as we do every day. Not only on this program, but the late edition of Balance of Power, which starts at 5 p.m. Eastern. Tomorrow's a big day in the nation's capital. Kayleigh's back. As we assemble our political panel for their take on both, I'm pretty sure I know how they feel about Kayleigh. But getting our heads around what's going to happen this week on Capitol Hill could take some work. Even the people we trust the most with the shiniest and clearest crystal balls are all saying, this looks weird this time. Talked to Nathan Dean at Bloomberg Intelligence. They're not running odds on this. And it's very difficult to see the way forward here. We'll see if Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino think otherwise. Jeanne is our Democratic analyst and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Rick is our Republican strategist and partner at Stonecourt Capital. Rick, does DHS shut down Friday night?
You know, the rule I always use is who wants a shutdown, right? Does the majority want to shut down? Republicans? And if so, that's highly likely. If the Democrats want to shut down, but in this case, both parties seem to want to shut down. And so my sense is you might have a shutdown at just DHS and only some agencies within DHS. It's kind of like a drive-by shooting for TSA agents, right? I mean, like, they haven't done anything wrong, and they're showing up for work when they weren't getting paid for 45 days during the last shutdown. Yeah. But they're the only ones likely to really be impacted along the sidelines. So at the end of the day, I mean, Democrats, they're making a calculation that people blame Republicans for shutdowns, and they'd be more right than wrong over the years. But Republicans have an attitude that the only way to negotiate anything on ICE reforms is going to be to play hardball. And so my guess is this is going to be a messier one than usual.
Boy, that's not good. Jeanne, the TSA just gets no respect, right? It's already got to be one of the hardest jobs to stand there and deal with all of us lined up and being jerks at the airport. Now you go without pay for the longest government shutdown in American history, and you're one of the only ones on the block this time around. Is there any way that Democrats can carve this up? I guess it doesn't matter because ICE is funded through the big, beautiful bill. So what's the point of this exercise?
I know, Joe, we're going to have to start thank the TSA agents as you go through because they
You're
have
right.
the toughest job. And by the way, I can't wait to see Kaylee sitting there right next to you, Joe, where she should be. So it's going to be fun. The only bright spot in D.C. this week. I was listening very carefully to Hakeem Jeffries over the weekend, and I agree with Rick. There on both sides, and just you go to Hakeem Jeffries, and he said very, very clearly, we put out our demands. There are no negotiations going on at this point. This was yesterday. Donald Trump, who would have to be involved to get this over the line, doesn't seem to be involved. And he said it is going to be Republicans who have decided that they want to shut down this department because they are unwilling to require ICE agents to follow the rules of the Fourth Amendment and the rules that all other security agencies and police forces in the country follow. And so Democrats feel very strongly that it is going to be Republicans shutting down, as Rick said. And I would suspect on the other side, as we keep hearing, they are not in a mood to negotiate on most of these 10 points. So another week, another shutdown potentially, Joe Mathieu, coming on Friday.
Sheesh. Is there any way that the White House can help by redirecting funds? Or I don't know if there's any kind of maybe there's a year-long CR for DHS. Rick, is there any way to do this where Democrats feel like they made a point, but we don't defund the TSA and FEMA and Coast Guard the rest of the year?
Yeah, I think that like all of these, you get to this point of, diminishing returns, right? And you saw that just take a long time in the last shutdown. And so how long is this going to be an issue? And how much does the public really understand about it? I mean, the advantage the Democrats have is because, these issues with Minneapolis were on the front page of every newspaper for a week or more. And it's been hurting the administration. The president had to send, his representative, his border czar Homan there to clean things up. I mean, it was a total mess for Republicans. Now, we're spending our time talking about Bad Bunny. I mean, all of a sudden, Minneapolis isn't on the front page of every newspaper in America, and yet the Democrats continue to believe that that the public outrage related to it and other things happening in their own communities of L.A. and Chicago and other places around the country is enough to empower them to hold this funding up. And Republicans are kind of making a gamble that the skies are clearing and they're not going to get punished by this. Well, all of this goes into the cauldron of 2026 midterm elections. And I must admit, unless Republicans are talking about the economy, they're off message and they need to get back on it. So if I were them, I'd be in the group saying, let's cut a deal, let's get this over with, and let's start talking about affordability.
Really interesting. Jeanne, we could argue, by the way, that we would not be talking about Bad Bunny if it were not for the ICE situation. Remembering the stand that he made at the Grammys, that was a big moment here. A lot of folks thought he might go there last night, but he did not. When you back away from this debate on DHS funding and consider the politics surrounding the halftime show in the Super Bowl, the angry post that President Trump made after watching it, how does that inform outcomes here in Washington?
It's such an important question because so much of what has happened in this debate has been driven by what's happening on the ground quite unexpectedly. So, 2 weeks prior to when the government was going to shut down, or say a week prior, we all thought the government was going to be funded and everybody in Washington would go home and work on the midterm. And then the horrific killings of the two residents of Minneapolis in terms of Freddie and Good occurred and changed the entire conversation. So The Super Bowl is another example of that. The Grammys are another example of that. Certainly when Bad Bunny handed his Grammy Award over to a child that looked like, but was not, the 5-year-old boy from Minneapolis who had been picked up by ICE, that created another in a long line of memories for people as to what has been driving so much of the concern here. And I think as you look at the Democrats' 10 demands, what you see is this has a lot less to do with immigration and border policy and a lot more to do with federalized troops and forces on the ground who are violating basic American rights in the Fourth Amendment in particular. And that is something that people left, right, and center believe is an overreach. And so it's part and parcel of a story that Democrats want to tell about corruption, costs, and chaos on the ground that they think is going to help them with 26. And if the president doesn't roll back some of what he keeps putting online, including the video last week about President Obama and the First Lady, that just sort of feeds this entire machine. So I think these events keep feeding what is going to be an impasse here over DHS funding.
Boy, Rick says that Republicans don't want to talk about anything or shouldn't than affordability. So this is not going to help. You know, who else was being talked about on Capitol Hill today is Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, who, by the way, had a deposition today, a virtual deposition before the House Oversight Committee. It was over in about a minute because she didn't answer any questions. She pleaded the fifth. Interesting, though, indicated that if President Trump ended her prison sentence, she'd be happy to testify. But he, or Bill Clinton for that matter, never did anything wrong in their relationships with Epstein. I mention this, Rick, because lawmakers today are able to go over to the Department of Justice and enter a special room that's been set up to review the unredacted Epstein files. And, of course, Tom Massey and Ro Khanna are at the front of the line. You can't take pictures, no electronic devices, as I mentioned, but they're going to walk out and do a news conference after. And I'm guessing they're going to be naming names and talking about things that we haven't heard yet. How important is this development today? How much of a distraction is that going to be to keeping the government running?
You know, I think it's just overall a distraction. It's a distraction to the midterm messaging, really for both parties. It's a distraction to getting a deal done. I mean, how many members are going to be over there looking at the salacious, reports on the Epstein files all by themselves, come out, and then the first report asks them, hey, what'd you see? And they have to sit there and figure out, what am I allowed to tell these people? What am I, going to get upset a bunch of the victims? I mean, like if I were the chief of staff of a member on Capitol Hill, I said, do not go anywhere near that reading room. It's a trap. You're going to have to answer for it. But like, again, tomorrow, we're going to have all kinds of shenanigans happening over there. People wanting to know what they read. Today, we're talking about, Maxwell, who, is serving a 20-year sentence. What's the point? She comes to Capitol Hill and takes the Fifth Amendment. Shocker.
Shocker. And there could be some actual shockers. If Rick is right, based on what we hear, Khanna and Massey are going to be at the cameras and microphones the minute they walk out of there. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, Bloomberg Politics contributors, thank you for the insights in a great panel. We'll ask Patrick McHenry about this. It's interesting what Rick said. No chief of staff would let his member go in that room, would he? This is Bloomberg. We take a deeper look under the hood just to see exactly what's happening with quite a nice rebound in tech following the severe selling that we saw last week, culminating with this massive rally on Friday and a lot of questions over the weekend about what was going to happen today. Norah is our markets correspondent live from world headquarters in New York. It's like it never happened almost, Norah, although I see the NASDAQ composite is still below the 50. We're charging higher.
Yeah, certainly charging higher. We're seeing the NASDAQ 100 bouncing for a second straight session. You're really seeing a reversal from what people were doing last week, where we saw it was a bit chaotic. It was a bit volatile when we think about all of the outflows that we saw from a lot of those software stocks. I'm keeping an eye on AppLovin, Palantir, Microsoft, all of these stocks charging higher. Essentially, you're seeing people in the market out here. They're trying to not only focus on the software stocks, but really broadening out a lot of those gains. And when you see gains in Microsoft, which we know tends to be a bellwether in the space, it really shows you that it's not just isolated to some of these smaller, the software names. It's really Microsoft pushing a lot of these other names higher as well. So really seeing a broad-based rally as it pertains to tech, definitely a different story than what we saw most of last week.
Yeah, even Salesforce is catching a bid here, Norah. Are the analysts talking? Because, it's not like we're moving on earnings on a Monday here. Or is this just some bottom fishing that's going on after last week?
Yeah, from a lot of my sources, they're telling me that people are buying the dip. They're really looking for any areas where they can avoid risk and really just trying to assess the landscape to see where opportunities lie. But you do have some people still a bit split. We did see that Microsoft was hit with its second downgrade in less than a week, that coming from Melius Research. So even as though there still maintains and continues to be AI optimism on a broader scale, you are still seeing people punching holes in the idea of an optimistic, forward-looking event.
There's always somebody here to punch holes in things, Norah. But Bitcoin's back above 70,000, so there does seem to just be a broader sentiment here to move things higher following last week. Or do we think that this was the big washout?
You did see last week where we saw Bitcoin really falling for some historic lows, and you're really seeing it trying to recoup a lot of its losses, as you mentioned, now hanging around that 70,000 handle. But when we think about Bitcoin more broadly, it's really speculative. So the fact that you're seeing it alongside tech rallying today, it really just shows you that traders are out in the market and they're really looking for opportunities and a way that they maybe were a little bit apprehensive about just last week.
We're through the bulk of the high-tech earnings, right? I see McDonald's, Coke, Cisco, DraftKings this week. Anything have your attention, or are we through the bumpy stuff?
Yeah, we saw a lot of bumpy stuff, that's for sure. But looking ahead, I've just really got my eyes on a lot of the different companies that are going to be reporting. You mentioned McDonald's. So when we're thinking about the consumer, it's going to be really interesting to get a read on how the consumer is doing in terms of affordability. And speaking of the consumer, we're also going to be getting a lot of data out this week. We're going to get that jobs report finally coming through on Wednesday. We're going to get CPI, a read on inflation as well, retail sales. So there's a lot to digest this week in addition to the earnings that still continue to come through, Joe.
Yeah. All right. Let's keep talking about it. Norah, thank you so much. Norah, Mulinda live in New York as we watch the markets get closer to where they were before last week's sell-off. We're almost there on the NASDAQ, up 1%, up 234 points, 23,264, and the S&P 500 is up about 0.5% right now, 69.70. Thanks for being with us here on Balance of Power. As we turn back to Washington, the prospect of a DHS shutdown, and of course, which halftime show you watched last night. Nothing has changed. Well, maybe that last part, but nothing really has changed in the story since the last time we spoke with Patrick McHenry. And that doesn't mean he isn't hearing things that I'm not. Bloomberg Politics contributor, former Republican Congressman, former Speaker Pro Tem with us here in studio, former chair of the House Financial Services Committee. Great to see you, sir.
Always great to be with you.
You improved all of our Sunday morning. I want to just let you know, and it's nice to see you back here. So let's park the halftime show for a minute. This is going to be no deal this week, is there?
No. Look, when we had this agreement for the Senate for a 2-week continuing resolution for Department of Homeland Security, we talked about it here. There was obviously a deal that you had in form in order to have such a tight timeline for action on the next appropriations bill. It takes 3 or 4 days for the Senate to do anything, and that is if you have agreement. And if there's disagreement, it takes longer. So I thought then that there was a deal that we did not yet see, but it's evident at the end of last week that there was no deal. Coming into this week, they would have to have an agreement within the next 48 hours in the Senate for some real deal to actually be passed into law in time to keep Department of Homeland Security open. That's not going to happen. It's apparent that will not happen. So then the question is for the Democratic minority in the Senate, do they permit a continuing resolution to keep the Department of Homeland Security open, or do they have a shutdown?
Yes. And
I think that's where the politics shift. If you have a shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security, that would then advantage the administration and President Trump in what has been a pretty rocky month that they've had.
So CR is the answer then, eventually. And I guess the question becomes duration, and I can't get an answer from anybody. Do we do another 2 week or just say, all right, rip off the Band-Aid, full year, check back in 2027?
I think a full year is less likely because of the politics of the left and what the left is saying to the leaders of the Democratic Party. So then it's a question of to what end? If it's a shorter duration and there is no deal evident, why do that? Why extend the pain? Why keep bringing this issue up if you can't come up with some legislative win to advantage one party or the other? So we're all watching, and we're all going to watch in live time of what that number is. It'll be something odd. It's not going to be some number built off of science. But I think the best outcome for both sides would be a long-term continuing resolution for the Department of Homeland Security, and then fight it out on the campaign trail.
I'm hearing chatter that Democrats might be impressed by a deal that does not include their demands. Granted, body cams were already out there per order of Kristi Noem, but in fact a change at the top of the agency. We're giving you body cams and we're giving you Secretary Noem. Do we have a deal? Have you heard anything like that?
Oh, that's a nice rumor, but I don't think President Trump is in that type of deal making. It's not going to happen. That is not. And if you've listened to his response, yes, he sent Holman in to take over the Minneapolis situation, which in traditional Washington parlance is the cabinet secretary getting demoted and some special operator coming in to fix the problem. It's clear that's what it was, but the president has not talked in those terms, and the politics haven't evolved in those terms. So I don't think the president is likely to sacrifice a cabinet secretary. And then that cabinet secretary would have to be filled. That goes through the whole nominating process, which would be a huge challenge to fill that secretary position.
There's nothing else that Republicans can offer, right?
No. And so this is a question of whether or not Democrats see the political advantage of continuing to continue the agency funding and then on the campaign trail to let this go, or do they insist on a shutdown, at which point they are potentially giving President Trump that upper hand when the Democrats are shutting down Homeland Security. Just the name of the agency is enough that you should see the bad politics of it.
It's fascinating. I'm just looking down at the calendar here. It's 2 weeks from tomorrow, State of the Union.
February 24th. Big night.
Is that an inflection point in this debate? Do they need to get something done by then? Or does it advantage the president to say Democrats are holding up the Department of Homeland Security when he's in the speaker's rostrum?
And thus why a long-term continuing resolution is to the Democratic Party's favor. And President Trump will use that bully pulpit that every president has in the State of the Union to drive his message. That is the opportunity for the president, if nothing happens before then, to turn this debate on immigration back to his advantage. It has been a political winner for him since he came down that golden escalator a decade ago. Immigration has been his biggest winning political, I would say, not policy, but the biggest, boldest sort of statement of who he is built around immigration. He needs to get the advantage back. He's got to get the groove back, and in order to get on with the midterm elections and hopefully bring a little more support for Republicans that we're currently seeing in polls.
Does Mike Johnson need to worry about decorum this year, or we assume that this is the octagon every year?
I think when Nancy Pelosi ripped up President Trump's speech,
that was it.
I think we've got full-blown no decorum in the House of Representatives.
Where were you in the chamber for your last State of the Union? Were you sitting like right in front of Marjorie Taylor Greene? I mean, what was it like to be in there with people yelling?
Like this.
Yeah, I bet.
Hide yourself.
I can't imagine.
Oh, I've seen everything. I've seen everything. And nothing would surprise me about the State of the Union. And now you see the progressive activist left when they're winning primaries like in New Jersey, special election in New Jersey a couple weeks ago. You see the energy of the Democratic Party is in those progressive, loud, outspoken folks like Jasmine Crockett and the far left of the Democratic Party. So I think you're going to see some shenanigans here.
Oh, my God. I don't doubt that at all. And I guess it's made for TV. We'll be there one way or the other. I'll be curious to hear how the president attacks this whole issue and exactly what the response will be. Did you watch Kid Rock last night?
So we can't even have one halftime show.
No, what do you make of it? But that was the microcosm last night, wasn't it? You saw the president's reaction. By the way, I'm sure all your friends at Mar-a-Lago were texting you, Bad Bunny's on the big screen. They had him on the big screen. It wasn't Kid Rock. We saw the videos last evening. What does that tell us about our politics and culture in the country, where actually Bad Bunny, love him or hate him, didn't say anything about ICE, or it was actually a pretty inclusive message. And the president had that that very critical post waiting the second he was done.
Well, so the halftime show, let's just go back in time.
Sure.
This has always been a standout performance from a standout global star. And even a special moment for whatever the biggest act on the planet is at that moment. I think we saw that last night with Bad Bunny. I think you saw the NFL seeking a new demographic here in the United States. You saw this emphasis from Bad Bunny about Americans, right? The emphasis there. So there's a big statement there. But you also had a big statement by the president that this is a divided moment for America, and we need to think of it as a divided moment. So we'll see how the politics shake out on this. This is more representative of the divide than in creating the divide.
Sure.
And our politics have become far more tribal now than in generations.
Well, yeah, it's the definition of tribal, I guess, when you have several halftime shows to pick from. But if you're a congressman from North Carolina and you just saw this president elected with the help of young Latino men, and we've got a midterm election where we're going to keep driving here, are you worried that the politics have changed already in a year?
You look for omens, and the bad omens that Republicans saw last was a special election in Texas that swung 31 points against my party.
Yeah.
It is a message that you have to focus in on what the American people care about. And if you're listening to the American people, they do want safety in their communities. They do want criminals deported, criminal illegals deported. Yes, they want border security. Yes, but they don't want to see activists gunned down in the streets and watch it over and over on video. So this is a moment where the president needs to get back to immigration in the way that he was winning on in the last election, and he needs to get back to an economic message and delivering on an economic policy set on affordability. Sure. Those are the driving forces of turnout for the midterm.
We know he can get along with anybody. Mamdani in the Oval. Why doesn't he have Bad Bunny come to the Oval Office? We'll hang out for the day. Wouldn't that be something? Play the tape back,
You heard
James.
it first.
You heard it first. Patrick McHenry. I think I know which one you were watching last evening. Kid Rock couldn't get the lip sync to work. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. Bloomberg Politics contributor Patrick McHenry. Bloomberg Business Week Daily is next.